Hello, everyone. I thought I would talk to you some more about my book, The Ecstasy and the Ignominy. I thought I would talk to you more about you can see the cover here, just the overall plot of the book. And of course, I will be making a series of videos about it. Of course, it is very hot today. For some reason, where I live in Kentucky, the heat tends to peak around the last week of August and like the first week of September. Then after that, it starts to slowly get cooler. Um, but anyway, um, there are of course various characters in the Ecstasy and the Ignominy. Probably the main character is Catherine Harris. She's the first point of view character that you encounter, and Catherine is essentially the wife of this wealthy industrialist named Frederick Harrison. They live in this town called Harrisville in the 19th century. Catherine was British, and she immigrated to Harrisville with her father as a teenager. But then, when her father was ill, she thought the only way she could pay for him to receive any kind of medical help was to marry Frederick Harrison. She was probably only around 16 when she married him at the time, and at the time of the book that the book takes place, she's probably around 45, 46. And that's her backstory, is that she felt like she had to marry Frederick Harris. Therefore, she did it more out of necessity, economic necessity, more than love. And so, Frederick Harris he's really obsessed mainly with his money, and in some ways he's kind of like an Ebenezer Scrooge type character. And even though he does have some compassion deep down, but he's afraid to show it or be vulnerable. And well, Catherine ends up falling in love with this man named Edward Compton, who works for Frederick Harris at his factory, and they manufacture steel, I believe. Although I don't go into too much detail about what they're building, but anyway, and so Edward is a free soul. Edward is probably in his early 30s, and he's a free soul. He paints. He's very artistic, and she finds you know uh, great relief in him, and how he sees the world. And so they end up falling in love, but of course it's forbidden because Catherine is also a very pious, very religious woman, and so she's constantly fighting between her passion and what she knows is right, and her passion for Edward. Of course, Edward. There's also there's concerning his character. There's also this revolution that's beginning to start, where the workers in the town are so dissatisfied that they want to basically take control and create what they believe will kind of be a communitarian, communist type system where the workers democratically control everything. And they're inspired by this professor named Bertrand Shaw, who's kind of a takeoff of Bertrand Russell and George Bernard Shaw. And he's a philosopher, and he puts a lot of these ideas in their head about how they're being ripped off, about how things like religion, spirituality they're basically opiates for the masses, and he wants to liberate them from all of that. And so he's one of the main villains. And then, of course, you have the character of Desmond Archer, who is the third narrator. And Desmond also works at the factory, but he is very dissatisfied with his lot. He's somewhat sociopathic. He's very angry, a very bitter person. He's probably the only character in the story that has very few, if any, redeeming qualities. And he wants to gain control, and he ends up trying to kind of seduce and con his landlady so he can get some of her assets. And then he gets more control in the revolution. But and then you have the character of and then Edward is kind of torn because he's in love with Catherine. At the same time, he disapproves of some of the aspects of the revolution, so he ends up working as a spy for Frederick, and so there's that tension there. And then of course you have the character of Mary Ingram, who is again the landlady who's lost her husband, and she's grieving, and so Desmond kind of takes advantage of that grief. That's kind of a subplot in the story, and And so that's essentially what the story is about, and all of these storylines kind of interweave. You also have some minor characters like Rachel, who is the secretary of Frederick Harris, but she kind of empathizes and sympathizes and understands Frederick in a way that most other people, even his own wife, really don't, and so they kind of have a unique bond. And but that's another subplot. And then you have a character like Thomas Lockhart, who is one of the competitors of Frederick, who's struggling for dear life. And you also have this character, a witch character, who is hiding in the mountains making prophecies. And so all of these storylines, of course, interweave and come together by the end of the book. And so that is essentially what the story is about. It deals with a lot of questions about the meaning of life, about the place. And there's also the character, I mentioned one major, the character of Reverend Heartstone, who is kind of like a guy who tries to convince some of the more passive people in his congregation to rise up and take control of the revolution. So the story kind of deals with two concepts. It deals with the problem of religious fundamentalism, but also the problem of completely rejecting God as well, which is kind of which is Bertrand Shaw's philosophy. And so you're dealing with a lot of these existential questions that kind of come together. And so the book has a lot of deep thematic themes that go into those areas, as well as a tragic love story and many other facets. And so that's essentially what the story is about. So hopefully that will interest you somewhat.